Good morning and welcome to today's 20-minute update, BCF's monthly series of interactive calls and Facebook live streams that give you an inside look at BCF, our initiatives, and the work going on in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and the entire region. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Andrew Waldman with BCF, and joining me today is Cheryl Casciani. She is BCF's Director of Special Projects, but she's also the outgoing chair of the Board of Commissioners of the Baltimore City Public School System. Good morning, Cheryl. How are you doing?
Good morning, Andrew. Thank you.
Before we get started, just want to take a minute to thank the Civic Leadership Fund donors who make this call possible. We do this every month and many other things because of the Civic Leadership Fund. So thank you to those donors. A couple quick housekeeping notes. We have some construction going on outside of the building and it's kind of loud. So you're probably going to hear a little bit of that as the call goes on. Apologize for that, nothing we can do about it. And okay, let's just launch into it. So today we're doing a little bit of a different kind of 20-minute update. As I said, Cheryl is the chair of the Board of Commissioners of the Baltimore City Public School System, and earlier this week she published an op-ed in the Baltimore Sun reflecting on her time as the school board chair and her service in general on the school board. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. That being said, in the interest of full transparency, she's going to speak in her capacity as the school board chair during this conversation. So her viewpoints don't necessarily represent those of BCF. It's staff, donors, or the board. So just getting that out of the way. And in the spirit of full disclosure, BCF does make a number of grants to the Baltimore City Public Schools. So that's out of the way. Let's actually get to the meat of this. So if you didn't have a chance to read the op-ed, you can actually take a look at the Facebook live stream comments. I actually posted the link to that in the Facebook live stream, so take a look at that if you can. So there's a few things I wanted to ask you about in this piece.
Great.
First of all, kind of give us some good news highlights of what the school system has accomplished during your time as a board chair and school board member.
Well, thanks, Andrew. I think that one of the things that's been really clear to me is how important strong leadership is, and we have a very strong CEO of City Schools, and very early in her tenure she introduced a blueprint, what we call the Blueprint for Change, and it's our version of a strategic plan. And as everybody knows, there's a lot of needs in city schools. Some things work well, other things don't work so well. And so you can be overwhelmed by how much there is to do. And this blueprint, which was developed in collaboration with a lot of partners in the community, as well as a lot of people in the system, it highlighted 3 key levers for change. So it's focused on literacy across all grades, student wholeness. Our students have a lot of needs, they have a lot of passion, they have a lot of interest, and we want to address all of that, not just their academic needs, but their whole needs. Mental health needs, arts needs, and leadership. You can't, I referenced Dr. Santelises as a strong CEO, but we need people to lead from wherever they are in the system. And those focal areas allow us to really prioritize our budget, and I think that's why we've seen some of the gains. We're particularly proud of some of the academic gains, and that is in the most recent PARC analysis, the state test on English language arts and math, that we had 44 schools with gains of 5 or more points. And I think the thing about that was, in addition to that being strong gains for a large number of schools, that the gains and the schools were widely distributed across the city. Some were charter, some were traditional, and many of them were in traditionally low-performing areas, and we feel that the additional emphasis, particularly on literacy, has really led to some of those gains. The graduation rate had its largest year-by-year increase in 5 years.
That's great. I just want to mention to people watching on Facebook that I did post a link to the Blueprint page on Baltimore City Public Schools website, so if they want to dive a little bit deeper into that, they can. So those are great things to hear. Also in your piece, you talk a little bit about budget stabilization. Why is it expensive to educate kids in Baltimore, and why does it matter?
Well, as noted in the op-ed, students in Baltimore don't come as prepared as they may from other districts or wealthier homes. They don't have healthy food options in their communities. They are exposed to a lot of trauma and violence. They are not. They don't have as much reading material and opportunities to read as youngsters before they arrive at kindergarten. And so the schools have to fill a lot of those needs, and they're expensive to do that. We want to provide full kindergarten for full day pre-K for kids across the city. We have been doing that for a number of years, and it's showing up as we have more kids come into kindergarten ready to learn. But the state is now finally going to fully fund that, and that's going to help. That's a very good thing. We've been doing that for years. This coming year, we're going to have a social worker in every school. Some people might say, well, why haven't you had one before then? Well, we haven't had the resources to be able to do that. But now we're trying to really prioritize in those three areas. So you're finding yourself having to recreate, essentially, the kind of a support system, social service system, work with a lot of partners, and that costs a lot of resources.
Sure. I just also wanted to take a minute. In your piece, you also mentioned concentrated poverty. We actually have a slide about that, which is on the top of it, it says Community Condition Index. We wanted to flash that for you just to kind of show the challenges of poverty in Baltimore City and how that affects schools. So what are
we use that. We use that tool, which was developed internally, drawing on a lot of data from the city to look at areas of traditional underinvestment, not just by the city schools, because we're part of that, but also other, whether it's housing investment, grocery store investment, health investment, and we are using that in combination with our new equity policy to make a lot of decisions. And so that's why it's so important when we see the gains in the test scores that we map that up against the conditions index to see if we're not just attending to the needs of students in areas of more wealth, which are very important, but we want the benefits and the investments to be spread more widely. And that community conditions index is a very important tool that we use.
And that kind of leads into this is a follow-up question about student wholeness. You talked a little bit about that, and we actually have a slide that kind of puts those resources on the map, sort of over that community index. Can you talk a little bit more about student wholeness and sort of define that for people and what that actually means?
Sure, because it's a big term.
Sure.
Because young people, as our adults, are complicated and have a lot of needs and interests. So sometimes we can get caught talking mostly about the needs. So you're talking healthcare, mental health supports. We've really placed a major emphasis on restorative practices with some terrific support from the Open Society Institute. And that is a way to, rather than when there's a dispute or children are having some challenges with each other, with faculty, rather than immediately villainize them and involve a school police, for example, it's to use a restorative circle so that everybody gets to talk about the person who seemingly was causing the problem, the people who were harmed by it, allow people to talk through it, agree together on a solution. It just calms everybody, and it's an alternative dispute resolution. And there's a lot of interest in that among our students, among our teachers. You'll see increased investment in it, and that's a way to break the automatic taking a quote-unquote troublemaker, because it could just be a child who's hungry, or it could be a child who saw violence on the way to school. There's a lot of reasons why young people might be agitated, and the restorative practice is a big part of that. But it also is about arts. You know, this year's budget, we're increasing the funding for fine arts teachers by 20%, and shout out to some really important partners there. Arts Every Day and Young Audiences, some partners that really help us to integrate the arts into the schools, but constantly keep the pressure on city schools to have qualified arts teachers. So it's the whole range of, think of what a student would get in a private school. You would make sure that they didn't just get English language arts and algebra. You'd make sure that they had access to all kinds of arts offerings, all kinds of after-school programs, and that's the whole child is doing that.
It's great. I want to take a moment and just pause and ask anyone who is listening on the phone if they have any questions for Cheryl Casciani. If you do, you can hit *6 on your phone to unmute yourself, ask the question, and then hit *6 again to go back into mute. So does anyone on the call have any questions? Go ahead right now. Okay, I don't hear it there. If you're on the Facebook live stream, you can also type them right into the comments, and we do actually have one right now, and I will read it to you, Cheryl. I'm going to squeeze my computer in just a bit. Would you please comment on viable career-focused options? And in parentheses, they say plumbers, heating and cooling, electricians, etc. for students. Thinking combined high school, community college programs, and paying apprenticeships starting in high school.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Thank you. We just reviewed at the last school board meeting on June 11th the results of a report that took a strong look at our career and technology education, and it found a number of things. One, that we weren't effectively distributing the access to those programs, but that we also were not targeting our programs to the careers that are in high demand with career opportunities and family supporting wages. And some of those that are mentioned by the person who asked the question are some of those. So I think the school system definitely needs to do a better job at coordination, coordinating with employers. Now that the charge has been put out there and the data is evident, the following up on it and making sure that we coordinate with all willing employers, including apprenticeship programs, labor unions that have apprenticeship programs. Those are all really important. But some of the onus is on the school system on this one to make sure that we have people in schools that are coordinating these, people at central office who are coordinating these. There already is a strong program with the community college to collaborate with the school system, but there will be a stronger emphasis on manufacturing, healthcare, some of the industries that are, and some of the trades that he or she referenced, because not all career tracks are created equal in some of these CTE programs.
Sure, and just my own personal experience with this, when I was an education reporter covering vocational ed, it is a very, very difficult thing to stay ahead of those trends, and coordination is an understatement for what you actually have to do. You have to be sort of you have to predict what the markets are going to do and how many kids need to be going down those pipelines. So it's hard work to do that.
It is also, but it's also, there's a false trade-off that people sometimes get into it. They talk about it as if a person's either on a career track or a college track. And what we know is that the trades that were mentioned by the person who asked the question, they require strong math and literacy skills.
Sure. So
so we don't think of it as vocational education. Everybody is on a career technology, career and college readiness. It's all part of the same bundle. We don't want to ignore the interest and the needs of young people who don't want to go to college, but we will not dumb down the curriculum, if you will, because a student doesn't want to go to college. They need the same set of skills. They need the math, the literacy, the civics, the communication, all that is needed by somebody who's going to be in one of those trades.
Very good point. I want to just ask another question on my list here. So in your op-ed, you talk a lot about the priorities. What does Baltimore need to prioritize as it relates to education?
So it's a tough question because we find ourselves now constantly making trade-offs. So we want to prioritize more arts teachers, or would you want to prioritize more college counselors? I'm not saying those two things are in opposition, but those are very frequently heard demands. People want smaller class sizes. It basically translates to more adults in the classroom. We need more literacy coaches. When we said this year that we were going to have a social worker in every school as a priority in the budget, one of the questions that was asked of us, well, why only one? Well, only one because we can only afford one. People want more technology. Technology is important, but it's also expensive. So I think that the priorities have been laid out in our budget, and they are this year pretty clear that there will be more literacy coaches, there will be more arts teachers, there will be additional social workers. We're doubling the number of literacy intensive sites. So we're not backing away from the priorities that we've laid out in the blueprint. I will say though that just because literacy is a priority does not mean we're ignoring math. A lot of people know that access to algebra is a gateway subject to the trades, to college, and we've also more than doubled access to an Algebra for All program for students in the 6th and 7th grade so that they're more prepared for algebra in 8th grade. So there's been a lot of attention paid to the distribution of advanced academic programs, and that's just one side of it, and it's not just in English language arts.
Great. So one more chance for people on the phone to ask questions. Hit *6 on your phone to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question on the phone. Okay, so there's a couple more questions in my queue here, and I have one that I definitely want to get to before that. So if we can maybe go through these a couple quickly here.
Sure.
From Facebook commenters. The first one is City Schools looking into ways to dramatically expand the community schools model in city schools? It seems to align with the blueprint.
Yes, very good question. We, as with everything else, dramatically expanding anything costs resources, and I failed to mention when I answered the whole child question the importance of the ability to involve and coordinate outside partners. So one of the first things that has been funded through some of the first wave of money from the state, from the Kerwin Commission recommendation, were additional city schools coordinators. So we're in the process right now of working very closely with partners to bring additional community school coordinators on. So you will see an increase in those. We also are working closely with our partners to sort of do an assessment on what are the most effective models so that as we dramatically expand, we know what we're expanding. We want to make sure that we're taking advantage of some of the best practices. We have excellent city schools partners ranging from Child First Authority and Strong Schools Maryland, Strong City Baltimore. There's just a number of ways we can learn how to do that effectively.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to ask my question and then I'm going to try to get this last one in. So can you give us, do you have a memory or memories that kind of stick in your mind from your tenure on the school board?
Yeah, I do. You let me know you were going to ask that, so I thought about it for a minute. Early in my tenure, there was a teacher, a high school math teacher, who came to a couple of school board meetings. She came back multiple times, always advocating for young people, and it just struck me as it seemed really a lot to ask of a teacher to have to do that, teach all day, and come back at night. And she was terrific. So I went to her, I took a morning and I went to her school and I sat in a couple of her algebra classes, and I watched this amazing teacher teach Algebra 2 in a classroom with about 30 students from, by my count, 10 different countries and 5 different languages.
Wow.
And this was a traditional high school. They were all engaged. They were teaching me things because I couldn't remember that all my Algebra 2. And it just was it's like a reminder of how remarkable our teachers are. Another thing that I remember, and might seem odd to some people that this was a highlight, but in January of 2018, it was the hardest board meeting I managed as a chair, and it was when the heat went out in city schools. The boardroom was packed, people were mad, and they were screaming angry. And while it was a difficult meeting to manage, it was a real show of passion and outrage on the part of the citizenry about what their kids deserve. Now, people responded. The state responded, the city responded, contractors responded. We took responsibilities from some practices that needed to be changed. So the response was in fact good, and while we still have a lot to do in our facilities, We have made major steps since that time. But what I remember was the passion and the outrage, and that's what you're sometimes surprised that there's not more of that in this city, because our kids aren't getting what they deserve from us sometimes, and the resources just aren't there to give them what they deserve.
Those are both great stories. Cheryl, we've come right up on 9:20, so I want to thank you for joining us on this 20-minute update today. It was a very good conversation. I want to apologize to Mackenzie, who did leave us a question that I didn't get to. I will make sure to follow up on the Facebook comment section with that to get you an answer. And once again, just want to thank all of the Civic Leadership Fund donors who make this possible, and to both the viewers on Facebook and listening on the phone, thanks for joining us. We'll be back next month with our next 20-minute update. Have a good day.
Thank you.